Welcome. Today we're going to explore a topic that might sound controversial at first: brainwashing yourself for success. But let me be very clear, this is not about manipulation. This is about neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself in response to what you repeatedly do, think, and focus on. The human brain is an adaptive machine. It's not fixed. It's not static. And that's the opportunity. We're going to cover 5 specific science-backed methods you can start applying today to condition your mind, literally reshape the neural circuits that govern motivation, discipline, confidence, and focus. These are the same circuits top performers train, whether they're athletes, entrepreneurs, or creatives. But the most important thing, you don't need to be exceptional to start. You just need to understand how your brain works and how to leverage its built-in mechanisms for change. Repetition is one of the most underestimated forces in the brain's ability to change itself. It's not just about practice making perfect, it's about how repeated thought and behavior actually rewires the architecture of your brain. Every time you perform a task, think a thought, or even rehearse a belief, your brain engages in what's known as long-term potentiation. This is the process by which synaptic connections become stronger the more they are activated. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more you repeat something, the more you literally carve it into your neural structure. This is why habits, whether destructive or productive, become automatic over time. Your brain conserves energy by locking them in as default patterns. Now, when we talk about brainwashing ourselves for success, we are not referring to blindly forcing affirmations or faking positivity. What we're really saying is, choose what you repeat with intention. Every day, whether you're conscious of it or not, you are repeating thoughts and actions that are either wiring you toward your goals or away from them. If you wake up and repeat thoughts like "I'm overwhelmed," "I can't do this," or "I'm not good enough," you're reinforcing a neural network that supports self-doubt. If, instead, you train yourself to rehearse empowering thoughts like "I can figure this out," "Every setback is data," and "I am becoming who I need to be," you begin to build a framework of resilience. And the key word here is train, because mental rehearsal is a form of training. Elite performers, from Navy SEALs to Olympic athletes, use repetition not just in physical drills but in mental conditioning. They visualize their performance. They rehearse high-pressure scenarios over and over in their mind. Why? Because the brain doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. The motor cortex and sensory areas activate similarly during both. So if you are repeatedly visualizing success, speaking success, and acting in alignment with success, your brain begins to recognize that pattern as normal. This is how identity starts to shift from the inside out. You're not faking confidence, you're conditioning it through repetition. But repetition only works if it's precise. Lazy repetition won't rewire much. The brain responds best to focused, intentional practice. That means each repetition should carry emotional weight or clarity of purpose. Just saying "I'm successful 100 times while scrolling your phone won't do anything. But saying it while in a deeply focused, emotionally engaged state, while visualizing a goal, or during a walk when your mind is clear, or just after a workout when neurochemicals are primed, can make a powerful impression on your neural circuitry. Another thing to understand is that identity is not fixed. Most people operate under the illusion that who they are is a stable thing. But neuroscience shows that your identity is a byproduct of repeated narratives and behaviors. If you repeat the behavior of someone who takes action despite fear, your brain begins to tag you as someone who is courageous. If you repeat the habit of showing up consistently even when unmotivated, you begin to believe you're a disciplined person. This isn't just mindset talk, it's biology. The prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, and anterior cingulate cortex all play roles in habit formation and behavioral reinforcement. The more consistent the repetition, the stronger the myelin around those neural pathways, making those behaviors faster and more automatic. There's also the role of attention in repetition. What you focus on becomes the anchor for repetition. If you repeat your failures in your mind, reviewing them over and over, you are reinforcing a failure identity. If you replay your wins, no matter how small, you teach your brain that progress is happening, which motivates you to take more action. This is why journaling success, daily affirmations, and intentional reflection are not just motivational techniques, they are rewiring techniques. You are selecting what to reinforce. You are choosing which neural pathways to strengthen. Environment also plays a critical role in repetition. The cues around you, your digital space, your physical space, your social circle, either support the patterns you want to ingrain or sabotage them. If you are surrounded by distractions, negativity, or inputs that pull your focus, your repetition will naturally drift toward the path of least resistance. But if you build an environment filled with triggers that remind you of who you want to become, you make repetition easier and more aligned with your goals. This includes visual reminders, post-it notes, playlists, mentors, routines, anything that reinforces the thoughts and behaviors you want repeated. The final layer of repetition is time. The brain takes time to solidify new circuits. Many people quit too early because they don't feel different after a few days or weeks. But what's happening beneath the surface is the gradual buildup of new wiring. You don't feel a tree growing, but it's happening. The same is true for your brain. Stay consistent with the thoughts, behaviors, and rituals that align with your future self, and the repetition will eventually tip the scale toward transformation. Dopamine is one of the most misunderstood, yet powerful neurochemicals in the brain when it comes to behavior change and success. Most people associate dopamine with pleasure, but in truth, dopamine is more closely tied to motivation, anticipation, and the pursuit of rewards than the reward itself. It's the neurochemical that drives you to act, to pursue, to keep going when the outcome hasn't arrived yet. And this matters deeply when talking about success, because success isn't a single event, it's a process that requires sustained motivation over time. Understanding how to leverage dopamine gives you a way to stay engaged, focused, and energized across that entire process. At a basic level, dopamine is released in the brain when we anticipate something rewarding. It's a signal to the brain that says, "This is important, move toward it." What makes this especially useful is that dopamine is dynamic. It responds to what we pay attention to and how we frame our experiences. This means you can train your brain to release dopamine not just when you succeed, but when you make progress. And this is the first key to leveraging dopamine strategically. Learn to associate dopamine not with the external outcome, but with the internal process. When you tie your dopamine to the outcome only, like the money, the achievement, the applause, you become dependent on variables outside your control. This creates a motivational roller coaster where your energy spikes only when success is visible and crashes when it's not. But if you train your brain to release dopamine when you do the work, when you finish a task, overcome resistance, stick to a routine, you create a self-reinforcing loop. You feel good for showing up. You build a reward system around the behavior, not the result. This kind of internal motivation is more sustainable and more resilient to setbacks because the motivation is coming from within. This concept is supported by research in behavioral neuroscience, particularly from studies involving the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, the network in the brain responsible for motivation and goal-directed behavior. What researchers have found is that people who learn to derive satisfaction from the process of effort have a significant advantage. Their brains generate more dopamine in anticipation of tasks, not just completion. This means they are more likely to start and persist even when the goal is far off. In real-world terms, this is the person who feels a surge of focus and energy not when they finish the project, but when they sit down and begin it. It's a trainable skill. One way to train this is through what's known as dopamine stacking. This means you pair effort with subtle, reinforcing cues that make the work feel meaningful or enjoyable. For example, listening to a specific playlist while working, journaling small wins, tracking progress visually, or even using specific breathing or movement patterns to shift your physiology can all signal your brain to associate work with reward. Over time, these cues become dopamine triggers. Your brain begins to crave the process because it links effort with positive neurochemical states. Another crucial element is the role of novelty and challenge in dopamine release. The brain releases more dopamine when something is slightly novel or just beyond your current ability. This is known as the Goldilocks zone of learning: not too hard, not too easy. If your goals feel completely out of reach, you'll feel overwhelmed and shut down dopamine release. If your goals are too easy, your brain gets bored and disengages. The sweet spot is to continuously stretch just beyond what you've already mastered. This creates a steady stream of dopamine through what researchers call incremental progress. You are constantly giving your brain fresh challenges and mini wins to chase. It's also important to be aware of how artificial dopamine through social media, processed food, or constant stimulation can hijack this system. When you flood your brain with dopamine from low-effort sources, you blunt its sensitivity over time. This means the natural dopamine that should be generated from meaningful effort becomes less effective. Your brain craves the quick hit instead of the slow burn of real progress. The solution is to reduce or eliminate dopamine-draining habits and create space for the brain to become more responsive again to natural sources of motivation. Sleep, sunlight, hydration, and physical movement also play critical roles in regulating your baseline dopamine levels. When your body is depleted, your brain can't access the neurochemical resources it needs to stay motivated. Physical activity, especially forward movement like walking or running, has been shown to increase dopamine availability in the brain and prime your nervous system for focused work. Early morning sunlight supports the production of dopamine and aligns your circadian rhythm, which directly affects your energy and clarity throughout the day. In other words, your lifestyle choices are not separate from your motivation, they are the foundation of it. Finally, how you talk to yourself and frame your progress directly affects dopamine dynamics. If you constantly downplay your effort or dwell on how far you still have to go, you suppress your own reward system. But if you learn to mark progress, no matter how small, with acknowledgement, if you learn to say, that was a win, even when it's just one step forward, you keep the dopamine cycle alive. You teach your brain to stay in pursuit. And over time, that pursuit becomes who you are. The work becomes the reward. Mental rehearsal, or visualization, is one of the most scientifically validated tools for shaping behavior and enhancing performance. It works because the brain doesn't entirely distinguish between real experience and vividly imagined experience. The same neural circuits that are activated during actual performance can be engaged through detailed visualization. This means that when you rehearse success in your mind with precision and emotion, you're not just daydreaming, you're training your brain, priming your nervous system, and preparing your body to take aligned action when the opportunity arises. This process is grounded in the principles of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated stimuli and focused intention. When you imagine yourself performing an action, whether it's speaking on stage, executing a business pitch, or stepping into a moment of leadership, the motor cortex, prefrontal cortex, and even parts of the cerebellum light up in similar ways to actual performance. This rehearsal strengthens synaptic connections, increases confidence, and creates a form of mental familiarity with the activity. So when the real moment arrives, your brain and body treat it as something you've already done, reducing fear and increasing fluidity. But for visualization to be effective, it must be precise. Most people are too vague when they visualize. They picture generic success or abstract ideas like being rich or being admired. That kind of visualization doesn't move the needle because the brain thrives on specificity. It needs to know what success looks like, sounds like, and feels like in granular detail. The more sensory-rich the imagery, the stronger the neural activation. What are you wearing? Who's in the room? What's the expression on your face? What do you hear in the background? What do you feel in your chest as you speak or perform or walk through that moment? There's also a timing component to visualization. One of the most powerful windows to do mental rehearsal is in the early morning, just after waking or right before sleep. These moments fall within what's known as the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states. During these times, the brain is more impressionable and the subconscious mind is more open. Alpha and theta brain waves dominate, allowing deeper emotional encoding of imagined scenarios. If you spend even just 5 minutes visualizing a specific success moment during these windows, you're embedding those images and feelings into your subconscious in a way that influences your baseline identity. Equally important is emotional engagement. Visualization without emotion is like rehearsing with the sound off. You need to feel what it would be like to be that version of yourself. When you can activate the emotions associated with success, whether it's confidence, joy, calm, or power, you're not just thinking about success, you're experiencing it. And the brain encodes experiences far more deeply than it does concepts. Emotion amplifies neurochemical activity, particularly involving dopamine and norepinephrine, which helps solidify the imagined experience as meaningful and memorable. It becomes something your brain seeks to replicate in real life. Another layer to visualization is including adversity in your mental rehearsal. Many people only visualize the perfect outcome, but high performers visualize the obstacles too and how they'll overcome them. This is called contrast visualization. You see yourself succeeding, but you also rehearse moments where things go wrong and you respond with composure and control. This prepares your brain for setbacks and increases your resilience. Instead of being surprised by difficulties, you meet them with a kind of mental déjà vu. You've seen this before. You know what to do. Visualization can also be combined with physical movement to enhance its impact. Studies on embodiment show that when you pair imagery with body language like standing tall, walking with purpose, or using expressive gestures, you activate more neural pathways. The brain encodes the imagined scenario as a full body memory. Even subtle actions like clenching your fists or controlling your breath while visualizing can reinforce a state of readiness and personal power. This is especially useful when preparing for high-pressure situations where composure and clarity are key. Consistency is another critical factor. One visualization session will not change your life, but regular mental rehearsal creates cumulative effects. Just as athletes don't train once and expect mastery, the brain needs repetition to reinforce new patterns. The more often you visualize a particular goal or version of yourself, the more familiar it becomes to your nervous system. This familiarity breeds confidence, reduces hesitation, and increases the likelihood that you will act in alignment with your vision when the time comes. Finally, it's essential to understand that visualization is not about escaping reality. It's about preparing for it. You're using your imagination not to avoid work, but to prime yourself to do the work with greater clarity, conviction, and direction. When done correctly, mental rehearsal builds identity. It changes how you see yourself and what you believe you're capable of. Over time, the imagined version of you stops feeling like fantasy and starts becoming the only logical outcome. The internal image creates external alignment, and your actions begin to match the person you've rehearsed being over and over in your mind. Your brain is constantly being shaped by what you expose it to. Every sound, image, idea, and conversation you interact with becomes part of the data stream that your nervous system uses to construct your perception of reality. This means your environment, what you see, hear, and experience on a daily basis, isn't just influencing your mood, it's influencing your mindset, your habits, your self-image, and ultimately your trajectory. The brain is a predictive machine, constantly scanning for cues to determine what matters, what to focus on, and what to expect from life. If the input you allow into your system is random, negative, or misaligned with your goals, the output, your thoughts, behaviors, and actions will be just as scattered. One of the key ways your environment programs your brain is through what's called attentional bias. This refers to the brain's tendency to notice and prioritize certain stimuli over others. What you focus on grows stronger. If your environment is filled with distractions, comparison, noise, and negativity, your brain becomes wired to filter reality through those lenses. On the other hand, if you intentionally shape your environment to promote clarity, purpose, and direction, your brain begins to lock onto patterns that support growth. This is not about living in a bubble or avoiding reality. It's about becoming the gatekeeper of your mental operating system. Modern neuroscience shows that the brain's filtering mechanism, called the reticular activating system, RAS, plays a crucial role in what you notice and act on. The RAS is like a spotlight in the mind, deciding what gets your attention based on what it believes is relevant. You can train the RAS to prioritize information aligned with your goals, but only if you feed it consistent cues. This is why vision boards, affirmations, and goal-setting practices can be effective. They give the RAS instructions on what to look for. But if your digital and physical environment is filled with clutter, stress, and noise, those signals are drowned out. The digital environment in particular has become one of the most influential shapers of our thinking. Social media, notifications, streaming platforms, and online content all compete for your brain's limited attention. These platforms are designed to hijack your dopamine system, giving you quick bursts of stimulation that lead to scattered focus and shallow thinking. Over time, this rewires your brain to expect novelty and instant gratification, making it harder to engage in deep, focused work or sustain motivation through difficult tasks. If your goal is long-term success, you must become intentional about your digital diet. This means curating what you consume, limiting exposure to toxic or meaningless content, and choosing inputs that elevate your thinking and align with your vision. Physical environment also matters deeply. Your workspace, home, and even the arrangement of objects in your surroundings can trigger subconscious associations. For example, a cluttered desk can increase cognitive load and reduce mental clarity, while a clean, minimal space can promote focus and a sense of control. Simple changes like adding symbols of your goals, inspiring quotes, or tools that support your habits can dramatically influence your mental state. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about function. You are using your space as a tool to shape behavior and focus. Social input is another massive factor in brain conditioning. Human brains are wired for social learning. We unconsciously mimic the behaviors, language, and energy of the people around us. This means the people you spend time with both in person and virtually are actively shaping your standards, your identity, and your internal dialogue. If you are surrounded by people who normalize excuses, negativity, or playing small, your brain adapts to that environment and begins to mirror those patterns. Conversely, if you immerse yourself in a community of disciplined, driven, and growth-minded individuals, your brain begins to recalibrate to match that energy. Even small changes in your environment can create significant shifts in behavior. Placing your phone in another room while working, keeping a book on your desk instead of a device, listening to instrumental music instead of noisy distractions, or posting your goals where you can see them daily. These micro-adjustments send repeated signals to your brain about what matters. Over time, these signals become internalized. They shape your habits, your focus, and your capacity to take consistent action. You begin to move through the world with less resistance because the environment is no longer working against you. The brain thrives on structure, clarity, and consistency. When your environment reinforces those qualities, your mind becomes more calm, alert, and aligned. You're not battling distractions or fighting against chaos. You're moving in a space that mirrors your values and amplifies your intentions. Your environment becomes a form of passive discipline. It reminds you who you are and what you're building, even when your motivation dips or your mind wanders. This allows you to conserve energy and channel it into meaningful work instead of wasting it on managing distractions or reorienting your focus multiple times a day. In shaping your environment, you're also sending a message to your subconscious that your goals matter. You're affirming that your identity is shifting. You're not just reacting to life anymore, you're curating it. And the more often your brain receives that message, the more it begins to encode it as truth. You start to believe in your ability to stay focused, to grow, to succeed, not because you're forcing yourself to think that way, but because your surroundings are continuously reinforcing it. Your self-talk is the most persistent and influential voice in your life. It narrates your experiences, interprets challenges, assigns meaning to failure, and dictates how you see yourself and your place in the world. This internal dialogue is not passive. It actively shapes your identity and behavior through a feedback loop between your thoughts, emotions, and actions. The words you speak to yourself consciously or unconsciously become the instructions your nervous system uses to determine what's possible for you and what isn't. If you consistently tell yourself you're not good enough, that you always mess things up, or that you're not the kind of person who can succeed, your brain encodes those statements as truth and organizes your actions accordingly. The brain's neuroplasticity means it's constantly remodeling itself based on repeated thought patterns. Every time you repeat a statement internally, you are strengthening the neural circuitry associated with that belief. Over time, those thought patterns become automated. They run in the background like mental software, influencing your decisions, reactions, and performance without conscious awareness. What starts as a passing thought becomes a lens through which you view yourself and the world. And the most dangerous thing about negative self-talk is that it often feels like fact, not opinion. It masquerades as truth because it's been repeated so many times. But the inverse is also true. You can rewire your internal narrative by deliberately choosing and repeating empowering language. The key is consistency and emotional engagement. Positive self-talk is not about fake positivity or blind optimism. It's about creating mental scripts that reflect who you are becoming rather than who you were. These scripts need to be believable, grounded in evidence, and emotionally charged. Statements like "I'm capable of learning hard things, I show up even when it's uncomfortable," or "I'm building discipline daily" reinforce a growth-oriented identity. They train your brain to recognize and replicate success behaviors. Your brain listens to your language, and it doesn't just care about content, it responds to tone and emotion. When you speak to yourself with compassion, firmness, or clarity, your nervous system responds accordingly. Harsh self-criticism triggers a stress response, releasing cortisol and narrowing your focus to threats. Empowering self-talk, on the other hand, activates circuits in the prefrontal cortex associated with problem-solving, confidence, and decision-making. In other words, your self-talk affects your biology, your performance, and your emotional resilience. One powerful method to shift internal dialogue is the use of second-person or third-person self-talk. Research from neuroscience and psychology has shown that when individuals refer to themselves by name or say "you" instead of "I" in moments of stress or self-doubt, it creates psychological distance and allows the brain to respond with greater objectivity. For example, saying "you've handled harder things than this," or "Arif, you've been through worse," engages a more balanced, strategic perspective. It's the difference between being trapped in the storm and rising above it to guide yourself through. Affirmations, when used correctly, can be another tool for shaping your internal narrative, but they must be specific, emotionally meaningful, and tied to action. Saying "I am confident" when you don't believe it will create mental resistance. A more effective version would be "I'm learning to become more confident every time I speak with clarity and calm." This kind of self-talk links identity to process. It reminds the brain that growth is happening in motion and that you're not waiting for evidence to believe, you're choosing to believe and acting as if, which creates the evidence. Another essential component of empowering self-talk is interrupting old patterns in real time. The moment you catch yourself saying something self-defeating, "I always fail at this. This is too hard for me. I'll never be like them," you pause, label the thought, and replace it. This is not about pretending the thought didn't happen, but about asserting agency. You might say, "That's an old script, and it's not useful here," and then redirect with a new script like, "What's the next best step I can take?" Over time, this practice rewires the automatic patterns and installs more useful defaults. The language you use also affects how you frame challenges. Saying "I have to do this" implies obligation and pressure, which reduces intrinsic motivation. Shifting to "I get to do this" or "I choose to do this" reinforces autonomy and engagement. Similarly, changing "I'm nervous" to "I'm excited" leverages the physiological overlap between anxiety and anticipation, helping to redirect energy in a more productive direction. These micro shifts in language have macro effects on behavior and perception. Writing can amplify the impact of self-talk. Journaling your internal dialogue helps you identify recurring thought patterns and create new ones deliberately. It also gives you a space to practice speaking to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply care about, with honesty, belief, and encouragement. The brain encodes written language differently than spoken or thought language, making journaling a powerful tool for deep identity work. The goal is not to eliminate all negative thoughts, but to become the author of your inner narrative. To take back control of the voice inside your head and train it to support your vision instead of sabotage it. That voice is always speaking, whether you're aware of it or not. The question is, whose voice is it? And is it building the future you want or reinforcing the past you want to leave behind? Your nervous system thrives on rhythm, repetition, and regulation. What you do consistently, especially how you begin and end each day, has a profound impact on how your brain encodes identity, builds habits, and regulates your emotional and cognitive state. Morning and evening routines are not just productivity hacks, they are powerful tools to reprogram the subconscious, prime your brain for focused execution, and reinforce the internal blueprint of who you believe yourself to be. Every time you go through a sequence of behaviors with intention, you're not just organizing your day, you're shaping your biology and sending signals to your brain about what kind of person you are and what kind of outcomes you expect to generate. The first few minutes after waking up represent a critical neurological window. In this early state, your brain is in a blend of alpha and theta waves, ideal for imprinting ideas, beliefs, and emotions into the subconscious. Whatever you expose your brain to in this phase sets the tone for your mental and emotional state for the rest of the day. If you immediately reach for your phone, scroll through social media, or consume chaotic input, your mind is trained to be reactive, scattered, and externally focused. But if instead you begin the day with intentional inputs such as breathwork, journaling, gratitude, visualization, or goal reinforcement, you establish internal control before the outside world begins to compete for your attention. The act of choosing a morning ritual is a signal to your brain that you are directing your day rather than being directed by it. Even just 10 to 20 minutes of a structured morning routine can radically improve mental clarity, resilience, and confidence. This routine doesn't have to be complex. It can begin with hydration to signal the end of a fasted, restorative sleep cycle, followed by a moment of stillness, whether that's meditation, prayer, or mindful breathing, to calm the nervous system and reduce cortisol spikes. Adding in a quick journaling practice, such as writing down 3 goals, intentions, or affirmations, helps orient the mind toward purpose and direction. Movement is another core component of a success-driven morning ritual. Physical activity, even just a few minutes of stretching, walking, or light exercise, stimulates the release of dopamine, norepinephrine, and endorphins, all of which enhance focus, mood, and motivation. Movement tells your nervous system that the day has begun, that energy is being mobilized, and that you're stepping into action. When done early, this primes the mind for forward momentum, creating a self-fulfilling loop where action leads to more clarity and motivation, which then fuels further action. The brain also responds powerfully to light, especially natural sunlight. Exposing your eyes to sunlight within the first hour of waking helps regulate your circadian rhythm, optimize hormone levels like cortisol and melatonin, and increase alertness. This seemingly simple act of stepping outside and looking at the sky for a few minutes has profound neurological effects. It's one of the fastest ways to anchor your physiology to a rhythm of wakefulness and productivity. Paired with breathwork or movement, it becomes a powerful trifecta of nervous system activation, hormone alignment, and cognitive readiness. Evening routines serve a different but equally important purpose. While the morning is about activation, the evening is about integration. It's the time when you signal to your brain and body that the work of the day is done, and it's safe to downshift into rest, recovery, and subconscious processing. Many people sabotage their sleep quality and emotional regulation by carrying over stimulation into the night, working late, consuming digital media, or mentally rehearsing stress. This keeps the nervous system in a sympathetic state, making it difficult to fall asleep, stay asleep, or achieve deep, restorative cycles. An effective evening ritual helps decelerate the nervous system and shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. This can include dimming the lights to reduce blue light exposure, turning off screens an hour before bed, and engaging in analog activities such as reading, journaling, or slow stretching. Reflecting on the day's wins, challenges, and lessons allows the brain to integrate experience and release the need for mental looping. Writing down thoughts or to-dos for the next day helps clear the mental slate, reducing nighttime anxiety and allowing deeper sleep. One of the most effective forms of subconscious reprogramming takes place during the 30 minutes before sleep. Just like the morning window, the pre-sleep state is dominated by alpha and theta brain waves, making the mind highly receptive to suggestion. Whatever you feed your brain during this phase is likely to be rehearsed and replayed during the night in the form of dreams and neural consolidation. This is the ideal time to engage in mental rehearsal, listen to guided affirmations, or review a future vision of success. These inputs get encoded into the brain's memory architecture and reinforce the identity you are working to build. Consistency is the secret ingredient that makes both morning and evening rituals neurologically powerful. The brain learns through repetition. Each time you repeat a routine, you're reinforcing neural pathways associated with discipline, intentionality, and identity. Over time, these routines shift from being tasks to becoming traits. You no longer need to force yourself to act a certain way because your nervous system begins to expect and crave these rhythms. You begin to act in alignment with a future version of yourself because you've trained your biology to live that identity, one intentional ritual at a time. In a world full of distractions, unpredictability, and emotional volatility, your routines become your anchor. They are the rituals that remind your mind who you are and what you're building. They are the structure within which creativity, focus, and resilience flourish. And most importantly, they are the tools through which you communicate to your subconscious that your goals matter, your time matters, and your identity is being shaped not by chance but by choice.